Can you guys hear me? I normally start with a joke, but I'm wearing a purple tie, so hopefully that will work it out for everybody. And I'm the only American who managed to mistake our flag for the Malaysian one. So, as long as that's blown up, it'll work for now. But as we've had people in Malaysia speaking, or there's got to be some Malaysian connection here. Thanks to modern technology, my presentation about comics in Palestine and satirical comics in Palestine has been lost. So I thought long and hard about what I wanted to speak about. And I decided to talk a little bit more about Rotary itself and the Peace Fellowship itself, and de-emphasize my own work, because you're going to hear a lot about that today from the other fellows. It's good to have you all here. It's good to see some of my professors and some of my friends, and a lot of people I don't know. But today I'm going to be speaking specifically to the Rotarians in this room. And I want to talk a little bit about how this fellowship and the ambassadorial scholarship have impacted my life. Not this year, but over the last 6 or 7 years. Over the last 6 years, I've spoken to hundreds of clubs and district conferences and things like that. So I'm less nervous than a lot of other people are. But it's taught me some pretty important things. I've been lucky enough to speak in 7 different countries to Rotary crowds. I've been lucky enough to see how similar Rotary crowds are everywhere else. And that's why it's always so comfortable to get up here. But I've always been speaking as a candidate, or as a fellow, or as an ambassadorial scholar. Today will be the last time I do that. Next time I address a room full of Rotarians, it will be as a prospective member, and I can't wait for that. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, I've strayed from my original plan to talk about Palestine. I want to talk a little bit more about the Peace Fellowship itself and Rotary. So let's begin. What is Rotary? I still remember my first experiences with Rotary. I was a young person, and I was I was riding in a car in the United States, and I kept seeing these symbols, the Rotary wheel on the highway. And Rotary has adopted what seems to be about 1/3 of the highways in Michigan. And I thought, what a strange organization. And when did highways get abandoned or orphaned? And when did we need to take care of them? And I always saw the Rotarians on the street, always very kind, always picking up garbage, always taking care of people. But it always seemed to be an older group, an old group of people that are engaged in a small number of activities. And of course, I was pretty young back when this image was formed. A lot of that has changed. It's obviously not this way, and that's what I want to tell you about today. This idea remained in my head until 2005, but we'll get there. In 2000, I went to the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, and a professor there told me that I should look into the Peace Fellowship. And she did so because at the time I was studying sociology and business. And we have some professors in the room, but I had to get used to conflict resolution early on. My 2 different faculties hated each other. And so I had spoken to a professor who told me about a new fellowship, a Peace Fellowship. And I thought that that was one of the neatest sounding ideas in the world. So I looked it up. At that point, it was only in class 2. And I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life. Part of it was not as wonderful as wanting to make peace. I actually wanted to have a business card that says Master of Peace. And I've got that now. It's really nice. It's wonderful. But it was the idea that there's an organization and something dedicated to actually doing good. Not studying good, not trying to do something through the private sector, which I originally started, but an organization that's just simply focused on spreading goodwill. I finished at University of Wisconsin-Green Bay and started looking into the application form for Rotary. And as people have mentioned, it's not as easy as you think. You need lots of years of experience. You need to know a number of languages, or at least another language. You need to have a record of service. So when I first looked at it, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I also knew that I was not qualified. So I spent the next 3 years, long before I met Rotary, traveling around the world, learning another language. I've forgotten most of it at this point, but it comes back at times. And getting involved in community service activities. And after I'd done this for a while, I'd lived in Spain for a while, in England, and worked in North Africa for a bit, I thought, okay, I'm ready to go back, and I'm ready to become a Peace Fellow and meet my Rotary Club. As we hear a lot today, Rotary is a very big organization. It was described as a little UN earlier, which I think is completely inaccurate. There's 1.2 million Rotarians, and there are far more countries in Rotary than are in the United Nations. This is a big UN. And Rotary helped found the UN. Rotary has a seat on the United Nations. Rotary is the largest scholarship provider in the world. Rotary has one of the largest foundations in the world. It's a big organization. And that's what I had in my mind when I went to the St. Joseph, Michigan Club to meet them for the first time. And I was surprised. It wasn't like that at all. It was just normal people in my community. They weren't all old, they weren't all men, they weren't all rich. It was very different than all of these ideas that I had developed when I was younger. And they weren't only adopting highways, which was something that became very important, because at that time, you have to understand that a lot of Rotary's visibility are in these projects that are very consistent and normal, the ones that people see. So today, I'll talk a little bit about the ones that people know less about. Here's my notes. I introduced myself and applied for the Peace Fellowship. I was really nervous at that point. That was the first time I had to speak publicly. But right before my speech, the Rotarians all began singing a song, which is something that they do in the United States regularly, and that helped to relax me. I wish we had started today with that, actually. But I still remember my first interview. It was in a Pizza Hut with 3 Rotarians. I dressed up in a nice suit like today to go hang out at the Pizza Hut. And after reading my application and talking with them for a while, they said, listen, you're not ready. The Peace Fellows are an amazing group of people, and we know you've got some experience, we know you've got some things under your belt, but you're not ready for this. And I got at least one picture of me looking really dejected. There. But they said, what are you doing tomorrow? Would you like to come to a Rotary meeting and check it out and learn a little bit more about what we're doing? And you just moved back from outside of the United States. Why don't you try and get involved and see what you think about Rotary, and maybe we can find a way to use you, not as a Peace Fellow, but as something else. So I did. I started going to my club. I started attending regularly. I have a very large club, 250 members, so much larger than this room even. And I was shocked. They are engaged in projects at the community level, the national level, the international level. They were working in ways and in places that I hadn't even heard of yet. And that was amazing when you think about a little town of 10,000 people in the Midwestern United States. And it was my experience there where they saw that I wanted to get involved, maybe even just for selfish purposes, but they thought, okay, well, let's use him while he's here then. And as a result, I got to be involved in a number of organizations in what, for me, is typical of this Rotary wheel in the middle. Every Rotarian that I've met is not only a Rotarian, they're also something else. They're also engaged in other avenues of service. So through my club, I was involved in Big Brothers Big Sisters, the Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity, Children's Safe Water Projects, a number of libraries, and a number of events. And Rotary at the local community level in St. Joseph, Michigan is amazing. And I got to stay there with them for 1 year working on these projects.